Twitter's history is full of scandals, takeovers, and betrayals. It was basically a non-profitable soap opera before Elon Musk came and changed everything. Think of Twitter as a precious stone, a viral, lucrative, life-changing idea that everyone wants. This idea is so big that its founders are willing to deceive and betray anyone who stands in their way. You see, while you were tweeting, real Game of Thrones was playing behind the scenes. Twitter is a dramatic tale of loneliness and friendship, of trust and betrayal, of dreams and karma played out before our eyes, so that we can learn from it and do better. Yes, karma is what's so great about this insanely amoral saga, ensuring that every good or bad deed returns to its author. There are more strokes of fate than a record-breaking number of betrayals. And the new player, Elon Musk, will prove to be Judgment Day for Twitter, because Twitter, the greatest idea of all, is shockingly only losing money. And Elon's intervention is Twitter's only chance to survive. You see, Elon's bold and far too expensive $44 billion acquisition of Twitter, which involved lawsuits on both sides, shows karma in all its glory. And this karma is as old as Twitter. In fact, it comes from birth. The year is 2005, and Noah Glass has a small tech startup called Audio that's all about audio podcasting and sharing audio files between users. Noah is so excited about this project that he hires a couple of engineer friends to help him build the platform. And since they're still at the very beginning and cannot afford to rent an office, he makes his small flat available as an office. But this gets him into trouble with his wife, who can't understand why Noah has to work from home and bring his friends. She doesn't believe it's just work and puts pressure on Noah to find investors and move into a real office. So Noah desperately turns to his neighbor, Evan Williams, who has just sold his big business, Blogger, to Google. And Noah knows he has a lot of money plus a flair for business. But Evan isn't into audio. He fears that this could ruin his friendly relationships with Noah, who in turn sees in Evan his only chance to save his business and his marriage, and is therefore prepared to negotiate until Evan gives in and invests in Audio, which eventually happens. But on condition that Evan becomes the CEO, which was a tough term for Noah, but one that he accepted because he desperately needed to put money into Audio. And Evan had a good reputation in the tech industry after selling his first company to Google, which also meant that he was a good leader. So it made more sense for both of them if Evan took over as CEO. And indeed, the moment Evan announced his new role as CEO at Audio, the investors really came calling, and Noah and Evan were finally able to grow their team and their business. But behind the curtain, these friendly neighbors who turned successful business partners were no longer so friendly. They literally disagreed on every little detail, be it logo design or launch timeline. Their collaboration was a nightmare. But in those early days, they thought these tensions would benefit their decision-making process and bring out the best in them. And for a while, things looked good for Audio, which was getting closer and closer to becoming the biggest podcast service on the internet. They moved from Noah's small flat to Evan's larger one, soon rented an office and started hiring more professionals. But then fate intervened, disguised as Apple's Steve Jobs, and brought them to their first major crossroads, from which only Steve Jobs would continue the podcast's journey. You see, Apple announced its new future, the iTunes podcast platform, which would be included in every iPhone from now on. Evan was devastated. And he's the rational part of the duo. He's level-headed, mindful, and calculating, while Noah has always been a passionate visionary who takes bold risks and stakes everything on ideas he believes in. But the shrewd Evan has clearly realized that Audio cannot possibly compete with Apple, and that the best thing to do is to cut his losses and kill Audio. But for Noah, who is the exact opposite of Evan, The end of Odeo, which he founded and sacrificed everything for, would also mean his death. So he mustered all his faith and, without thinking twice, entered into another cycle of negotiations with Evan. And since he had a pretty good idea of Evan's character by now, he knew he had to offer Evan something tangible, money attractive, and market leading. And so Noah suggested that before they sank the ship, they should at least talk to their loyal team to see if anyone had an idea worth pursuing, since Odeo still had money and all the business infrastructure was set up. Evan agreed, but was not ready to jump into a new idea right away and forget about Odeo. He still had investors who expected something from Odeo, so he continued with the usual podcast business, but left Noah free to find the next big idea. And sure enough, Noah found an idea so big and significant that it would transform not only the dying Odeo into a billion-dollar social platform, but also the entire world and the way information is disseminated. And this idea came from one of their employees, who had previously worked at Google and was one of the top employees at Odeo, Jack Dorsey. Jack was quiet, withdrawn, and contemplative, and he was about to play the game of his life and raise the stakes for everyone twice. From the moment Noah hired Jack Dorsey to work at Odeo, the two hit it off right away and became friends. They had a lot in common. They were both passionate visionaries who were human-oriented and very interested how the internet was shaping personal connections and creating new ways of relating between people. They both believed that the internet was the greatest social experiment of all time and wanted to make the most of the new opportunities it opened up. Noah investigated social networks like MySpace and tried to understand what people really wanted from the platform. He saw that the systems weren't designed for the way people tried to communicate. Their communication wasn't in real time, but was almost like a form of blogging. Now, at this point, both Noah and Jack were generally dissatisfied with their lives. Noah felt increasingly lonely after losing his marriage and his friendship with Evan, both ironically because of his work, and he wanted to make new connections. Noah had always struggled with feeling lonely, perhaps because when he was little his father had gone out for milk and never returned. Meanwhile, Jack was fed up with the technical stuff he was doing at Odeo and wanted to develop a new product that would bring human value to users. And late one night, Noah and Jack were sitting in the car in the rain on Mission Street, still trying to figure out what their mission was and how they could help people communicate online in a way that would really connect them. Jack talked about the idea of status and how much he had fallen for this idea that people could tell everyone what they were doing just by using their phones. You see, in the 2000s, this was a popular idea. Facebook used status extensively, and Foursquare was based entirely on this idea, not to mention the Bourbon app that later became Instagram. Jack had already developed a bike messenger status system in the past and wanted to build on that. Noah wasn't much into status, but he liked the idea of connecting, and they both wanted something based on group dynamics and group formation. So when they combined the idea of status with the idea of group formation, everything opened up to them. Their product was to be a spontaneous grouping mechanism based on status updates that would run on mobile phones. Noah and Jack presented the idea to the rest of the company. Evan got interested and things got rolling. Noah cracked open a dictionary to find a name for this new venture and stumbled across the word Twitter, defined as a short bundle of inconsequential information cut off by birds. Very apt. Noah and Jack immediately agreed that Noah would run the Twitter project while Jack would take care of the programming. Interestingly, at that time, there was another service called Dodgeball, which was also an SMS social media network. It sounds strange today, but the original Twitter was based on text messaging, because technology at the time wasn't yet capable of using social media instantly. Instead, you would send your tweet to a phone number and the status would be forwarded to your friends. Evan Williams wasn't that enthusiastic about Twitter, but he put Noah in charge of the project, and by March 2006, they had a working prototype that everyone in the office loved. which was the first sign of Twitter's huge market potential. Now, Odeo began to invest more time and resources in Twitter, and within a few weeks, the first version of Twitter was ready. On the 21st of March 2006, Jack Dorsey tweeted for the first time, "I'm just setting up my Twitter." That's not a typo, that's how they start the name originally. However, the Odeo Investors Board didn't support this strange side project and had many questions, so Evan was under a lot of pressure, especially knowing that the podcasting platform was going nowhere while the success of Twitter was becoming obvious. The Odeo staff were so obsessed with Twitter that they were accumulating monthly SMS bills of hundreds of dollars, and by the summer, Twitter was spreading like a storm in San Francisco. And by the autumn, they had thousands of users posting personal status updates and local news. Suddenly, the whole company realized how useful the platform was for news. Twitter was a new form of instant messaging, both macro and personal, and so actually more of an information network than a social network. Evan finally understood what was special about Twitter and how he could set it apart from the competition, first and foremost, Facebook. And he knew what he had to do. He had to seize the moment and launch this precious baby Twitter into orbit like a new sun. But what he did was the first surprise turn for Twitter, and there were many more to come, because Evan didn't do the usual thing. He didn't inform his wary investors about Twitter's potential. He didn't tell them that mobile operators had never seen as much SMS activity as Twitter, and he kept the early signs of Twitter addiction to himself. Instead, he wrote a letter to the investors, offering to buy back their shares. He informed them that he had decided to change Odeo's direction and start a new social platform, Twitter, as it didn't make economic sense to continue the podcast business. However, he cannot guarantee that his new venture will pay off, as Twitter is still at an early stage and only has a few thousand registered users. And so he offers to buy back their shares because they were for the podcast business, which he abandoned in favor of the new social platform, which may not pay off. Okay, that's one way to look at it. And of course, the investors agreed, and Evan bought Odeo and put everything into Twitter, which started such a rapid development that many investors felt Evan had screwed them over. Meanwhile, Noah couldn't contain his enthusiasm when it became clear that Twitter was the next big thing. So he started making big mistakes that will put him on a downward spiral. He announced Twitter at a party before he was supposed to, which meant they got a lot more traffic than they were prepared for. And he made no secret of how he felt about Evan, telling everyone Evan should step down as CEO, even though Evan had just bought back the entire company and held all the power. You see, Noah was always straightforward, vocal, and emotional, while Evan was the complete opposite, very quiet, pleasant, and always concerned with one thing. Evan would never yell at you in front of the staff, or he probably never would, while Noah couldn't control his strong temper. Besides, the two had completely different ideas about how Twitter should be run, and so Noah talked to Jack about it and said that Twitter would be better without Evan, who doesn't really understand what it's all about. And since Noah had founded Odeo and Twitter was based on Jack's status idea, it doesn't make sense for Evan to be in charge. But Jack didn't see it that way, and Noah was completely unprepared for what was about to happen, because actually, Jack didn't like Noah at all. Jack was a quiet, withdrawn guy, just like Evan, and he found Noah embarrassing to the company because he was so loud, enthusiastic, and controlling. Jack also didn't appreciate that Noah was constantly causing tension by contradicting Evan on every little thing and just trying to get his ideas accepted. He actually wondered how Evan put up with Noah. And he definitely felt that Evan was doing everything right as CEO, and it would be a disaster if Noah took over, because Noah stuck his nose into everything and told everyone how to behave. Once Jack was flirting with a woman in the office who was engaged, and Noah kindly told him to back off, but Jack said it was none of his business who he was flirting with. So although Jack and Noah became friends, this friendship didn't last long for Jack. He just couldn't stand Noah's character, who was unaware of this fact, and Jack probably thought less of him because of it. And Jack met with Evan and told him that they had to get rid of Noah, or Jack would leave the company forever. Evan knew where Jack was coming from, so he fired Noah, even though it was Noah who'd started it all. But Evan had to think like a businessman. Later that night, Noah met Jack in a bar and told him that Evan had fired him. Jack reacted in shock, knowing that Noah wasn't ready to hear the truth about his character. Noah burst into tears and hugged Jack, without having any idea that he was responsible for the biggest betrayal of his life and the next big turn for Twitter. By 2007, Odeo, which had become obvious, had completely abandoned podcasting and focused exclusively on Twitter, which was growing faster and faster, and more people were joining and tweeting every day. Of course, there were other social networks before Twitter, but Twitter's 140-character informal stream of consciousness style proved incredibly popular. As Twitter grew, however, the administration became increasingly overwhelming, and Evan decided to retire from an active role in the company and become chairman instead, which meant that the CEO position became vacant, and Jack Dorsey took the place. Now, although Twitter had many burning issues, it seemed to have a life of its own. Having been developed quickly in just a few weeks, Twitter's infrastructure couldn't support all of its users, and Twitter crashed daily, ironically generating even more headlines that led to even more users visiting the site, which in turn led to the service crashing even more frequently. Twitter was growing faster than anyone could have imagined, and the site's programming simply wasn't designed to scale so quickly. Twitter users became very familiar with the message that the service was overloaded, which became known as the fail whale. And when Twitter was still working, users found their own ways to use the site. For example, if they wanted to talk directly to someone, they started using the @ symbol. And if they were referring to specific topics, they used hashtags. And that's what's interesting about Twitter. From day one, everyone had their own ideas about how to use Twitter. For some, it was a social network. For others, a microblogging and news service. And for still others, it was a substitute for text messages and emails. Even Twitter's employees had different views and couldn't agree on which direction it should go. Jack Dorsey, who had just been appointed CEO, believed that Twitter should be used to broadcast what people were experiencing at that moment, because that was what his status idea was all about. But Evan Williams, who's now chairman of Twitter, felt that the value of Twitter was in sharing information and communicating about what was happening in the world. He saw Twitter as an information network rather than a social network. Like when a US Airways flight crashed into the Hudson River and a ferry passenger posted a photo on Twitter, spreading the news ahead of traditional media. This was a real eye-opener for Evan, who knew that Twitter will always mean different things to different people. But still, Twitter needs to have a clear identity to stay relevant. And maybe it's karma or power that changes people, but once Jack became CEO, he and Evan argued all the time, just like Noah and Evan. Jack didn't want to let Evan tell him what to do after he left the CEO post, but Evan couldn't trust him enough because Jack was clearly missing out on a lot of Twitter's potential, and the fame in particular was going to his head. You see, Jack was quite infatuated with his exciting new social life as CEO. He was invited to events he had never had access to in his life. He was enjoying this new life as a mini celebrity to the fullest. And the problem was that Evan had stepped down as CEO because he didn't think he could fully focus on Twitter And now it seemed Jack wasn't fully focused either. Jack was even taking random evening classes like fashion design, and Evan just didn't understand what that was about. But the worst thing was that Jack did very little about the constant service failures. Jack was so focused on building new features and working on new product development that he neglected many other areas, and even some employees started complaining to Evan about Jack and his questionable leadership skills, which ended up being true. Because apart from some basic ideas, Jack had no management experience, and Twitter descended into chaos. The straw that broke the camel's back was in 2008, when Evan found out that Twitter had no backup. And you know what that means. If the database had crashed at that moment, they would have lost every single user as well as all the tweets. This was too much for Evan, and he convinced the other investors that Jack should give up running the company, and of course, they agreed. The next day came the news that Jack Dorsey was out, and Evan Williams returned to the role of Twitter CEO. What a turn of fate. In 2008, Jack moved to the board, and Evan took over as CEO again. Twitter announced that Jack and Evan had agreed to swap positions, but this was hardly true, as Jack hadn't been consulted and didn't see it coming. So he was absolutely shocked and angry that he lost the CEO post to Evan. To him, it was absurd because Twitter was expanding rapidly and he was bringing in a lot of innovations. Sure, they had some problems, but to be tricked and cheated in this way without any respect was exactly what had happened to Noah. And Jack understood how Evan played the game, so he decided to play the game too. He wasn't going to quietly withdraw like Noah, whose reaction to being betrayed by his friends was to feel ashamed and isolate himself from the world because it was too painful for Noah to see Twitter, his brainchild, grow so big without him. Noah played such a crucial and passionate role in founding the company that when he was brutally kicked out, he retreated more and more into isolation. But Jack, being the calm and composed type, decided to do just the opposite. He began giving as many interviews and public speeches as he could to keep the spotlight on him in case he needed it. And although this reaction might make it seem that fame had gotten the better of him, it was actually a strategic move to reclaim his title in case circumstances turned in his favor. And Jack knew how to bide his time in style. And since the public image was all he had after his promotion to the chairman, he decided to use it strongly to his advantage. So he continued to pretend to run Twitter when in reality he was just waiting for Evan to start making mistakes and get back at him. Meanwhile, Evan went full throttle and equipped Twitter with professional management, which of course paid off handsomely. Jack once again watched and learned from the back seat. The first thing Evan did as second-time CEO was to take care of the technical details as getting the top backup and stopping the outages. You see, the fascinating thing about Twitter was that despite all the chaos and backstabbing behind the scenes, it was inexorably going up. It had taken 8 months to reach the first 20,000 users, and now 20,000 new users were joining every hour. Celebrities were showing up at offices wanting to get involved, including Kanye West and Lady Gaga. But it was not just celebrities who were spreading Twitter. Many world leaders used Twitter to spread their messages. During Twitter's crazy growth, there were also several takeover offers from companies like Yahoo and Facebook, but Twitter always turned them down. They didn't need to sell, even though they were far from being profitable. You see, Twitter was like a rich heiress living off credit, whose social success was so great and immediate that everyone thought it would pay for itself, which of course did not happen. And investors became increasingly frustrated with Twitter in 2009. And this was the opportunity Jack had been waiting for. Investors wanted profit, so Evan hired his friend Dick Costolo as Chief Operating Officer, whose job would be to focus on monetizing Twitter. This was a common pattern with Evan, who always hired his friends and family because he thought they would never betray him. And Dick turned out to be a good choice for Twitter because he started selling ads that would become Twitter's main source of revenue. But that hardly meant Evan was off the hook, because monetization was not the investors' only concerns. They were also concerned about how slowly Evan made decisions. He spent weeks thinking about an insignificant detail that the board believed was hindering Twitter, and he seemed to have a hard time hiring anyone for senior positions who was not already friends with him, possibly because of trust issues. So the board began to doubt whether Evan was the right person to make Twitter a highly profitable company. Since Evan seemed to spend little time thinking about how Twitter could make money and focused only on improving the service, which is not the only thing a CEO should do, meaning a big turn of fate is coming. You see, when Dick first joined, one of his first tweets was a joke. First day as CRO, tomorrow task number 1, undermine CEO, consolidate one power. Evan laughed, Jack laughed, and fate laughed. Because what Dick wrote was indeed a prophecy. In fact, there was a lot going on behind Evan's back. Because investors wouldn't worry so much about Evan unless they got the information they didn't like. And there was only one man who had an interest in making Evan look bad. That was Jack Dorsey. Jack was still furious about his ejection from Twitter, and it is reported that he was pulling strings behind the scenes to get Evan kicked out as well. Like a chess master moving pawns around, Jack gathered information about everything Evan was doing wrong and subtly dropped hints to Twitter investors and their connections to sow doubt about whether Evan should be running Twitter. And it worked. The board called a meeting to vote on whether Evan should be replaced as CEO. Of course, Evan didn't know about it until it was too late. Some of the Twitter investors, however, continued to support Evan, but many didn't. And so it came down to a tie-breaking vote in which fate had its fun. The deciding vote on whether Evan should be fired as CEO went to Twitter's chairman, Jack Dorsey. It was ironic and insane because it was Evan who had given Jack the title of chairman and the vote on the board because he felt guilty about firing him a few years ago. And now that decision was going to be Evan's downfall. Yes, Jack voted against Evan. And Evan was kicked out of the company in 2010. Karma is really making fun of these people. Noah was kicked out by Jack in 2006, who was kicked out by Evan in 2008, who in turn was kicked out by Jack in 2010. And these guys were co-founders of Twitter, who were all really good friends at first. But as if Twitter led them to do the worst things, they started backstabbing and working behind each other's back. But the worst was yet to come for Evan. Because who do you think will now become Twitter's new CEO? As it happened, the board chose Evan's close friend, Dick Costolo, because he was so focused on monetization. But Evan didn't believe Dick was innocent, and he suddenly remembered Dick's first tweet with horror. And perhaps he remembered Noah and what it must have been like for him when Evan threw him out. You see, Evan closed the karmic circle, and karma came back to him. And now it's time for Jack to work through his karma and return to Twitter for a second chance. Jack was finally allowed to return to Twitter after Evan was fired as CEO. But it will be another 5 years before Jack is back in the captain's seat. For now, he has settled for a more low-profile role at the company. In November 2013, Twitter went public, with the market price opening at $26 and closing at $44. In October 2012, Twitter bought Vine, a short video service that was released as a standalone app in January 2013. Vine was very popular, but was unable to capture the market due to chaotic management at the time, and therefore was discontinued in 2016 by Jack Dorsey, who returned as CEO in 2015, leaving the market open for TikTok and Musical.ly. This move is considered Twitter's biggest failure. But from Jack's example, we can actually see how karma works on many levels. It can destroy you in the blink of an eye, but it will take years of quiet, dedicated effort to return to power. Now, all three founders betrayed each other, only to be betrayed themselves in the end. But if we look at things from their side, we have to see that they were all trying to do what they thought was best for Twitter. But they all had different visions of what that could be. And regardless of their roles in the founding they attributed to themselves, the truth is that there is no single creator of Twitter. It was a group, a collaborative effort. Which is also quite ironic when you remember how fascinated Noah and Jack were with group models and formations. But that's what makes a group. Without Noah, there would have been no company. But without Evan, the company would never have gotten funding. And without Jack, they never would have had the status idea that formed the basis for what Twitter became. Each founder contributed many different ideas that helped build Twitter. And many other employees also played an important role, such as one of the first employees, Biz Stone, who is also named as co-founder. Which is a funny story because it was an early long-shot request from Biz that was eventually granted to him by Evan. However, if we put all rationalizations aside, it is absolutely clear that Noah Glass, the man who started it all from his small apartment, is the biggest loser of the Twitter saga, because his name has been largely erased from history. Just look at his Wikipedia page, it's tiny, considering he played such an important role in such an influential platform. Noah Glass has just 45,000 followers on Twitter, and his bio simply says, "I started this." And he did. But only Jack and Evan became billionaires. And Noah had no stock, so he probably earned next to nothing. The irony is that Noah started Twitter with the goal of making people feel less alone, and he ended up being the loneliest person in the world. Twitter destroyed his relationship with his wife and his best friend and left him with nothing. Today, Noah is not present on the internet at all, and he probably hates it. As for Twitter itself, since Jack reclaimed leadership of the company in 2015, Twitter has still struggled to monetize itself as effectively as many of its competitors, and only became profitable in the last quarter of 2017, when it had 330 million monthly users. So Jack began adding more features to increase user interaction, as he'd done when he first became CEO. In 2015, Twitter introduced Moments, which allowed both users and the algorithm to create thematic collections of tweets and other content. But by 2017, Jack replaced Moments with Explore, which integrated Moments with other featured trends. The biggest change for users, however, came with the increase of the character limit from 140 to 280 characters, a double increase that put off some early users who'd become accustomed to writing their thoughts in 140 characters and felt cheated in some ways. And when you think about it, a character limit was the main thing that made Twitter so popular and influential. It became a matter of skill and mutual respect to express yourself in fewer words. But we mustn't also forget that Twitter always wanted to be more than a social network. And so this kind of expansion benefited the journalistic community, which began to use Twitter regularly for all kinds of news-related activities. And then, Jack made another questionable decision when he introduced Fleets in late 2020. Fleets were temporary collections of tweets that disappeared within 24 hours, much like stories on Snapchat, Instagram, and Facebook. But just 9 months later, Jack discontinued Fleets because they weren't resonating with users in such a short period of time when a lot was happening in people's lives. Just 3 months later, in November 2021, Dorsey again stepped down as CEO and was replaced by Chief Technology Officer Parag Agrawal, who has been with Twitter for 10 years. This surprising twist of fate was due to several facts. First, Jack outgrew Twitter and wanted to devote his time to his side projects. Second, he announced in 2019 that he'd be relocating to Africa for 6 months, which wasn't warmly received by both employees and investors. When the pandemic broke out, he abandoned that idea. Third, he set off a political firestorm and offended many people when he banned former President Donald Trump from the platform. And lastly, one of his side projects, his digital payments company Square, which he ran as CEO, caused him major problems with Twitter's board, which asked him to step down from one of his CEO roles, either Twitter or Square. And after 16 years at Twitter, Jack chose Square, which he co-founded in 2009 after being ousted from the executive chair at Twitter. Funnily enough, considering the twisted story Twitter has had with its co-founders, Jack said in an email to his staff after he stepped down as Twitter CEO that he does not believe companies should be run by founders because it is a severe limitation and a single point of failure. He also added that he has been working hard to make sure Twitter can move away from its founders. Funny guy. Meanwhile, despite all its special problems, Twitter continues to enjoy great popularity and has provided a platform for hundreds of millions of people to express themselves and feel more connected. On the other hand, opinions about Twitter are becoming more and more divided. For many, it's a very toxic place that struggles with the same issues as other social media like Facebook. For example, there is the question of whether it is a platform or a publisher, and how much control Twitter should have over what people say. Some feel that Twitter does not do enough to control abuse on its pages, while others feel that Twitter suppresses free speech and enforces its own political biases. And one of the most vocal proponents of free speech was none other than Elon Musk. Musk has vehemently opposed the closure of Donald Trump's account. He believed that the people who design the algorithms should not have the power to influence what information and news you can actually see. Musk began generously buying Twitter stocks and sharing his opinion on how the platform works. Until one day, he publicly announced that he became a majority shareholder with a 9.2% stake in the company. The next day, Twitter announced that Musk would join the board to work together on content moderation issues. And that's when the action started. Twitter was part of the first wave of social media companies, founded just a year after YouTube and 2 years after Facebook. But where those two became billion-dollar companies, Twitter didn't come close. Just last quarter, Facebook had about 10 times more users and made 10 times more money than Twitter. From April to June 2022, Facebook made a profit of $8.4 billion, and Twitter lost $344 million, which is a lot of money to lose in just 3 months. And after 15 years of living on the edge, Twitter faced the very real possibility of running out of money. And then, this happened.
To Elon Musk. The Tesla and SpaceX CEO acquired the social media company for roughly $44 billion. Musk proposed to buy Twitter for just over $54 a share earlier this month.
This crazy twist of fate was precedented by long negotiations with many misunderstandings and confusions. First, out of the blue, Elon made an offer to buy Twitter outright for $44 billion. He happily tweeted his ideas for improving the service, but a few weeks later he suddenly backed down and put the deal on hold until he gets more information from Twitter about the number of spam accounts on the site.
I feel like Elon is pretty close to saying, I'm so sorry, my 2-year-old took my iPad and clicked buy, so I didn't know what... So we're cool.
But Twitter sued Musk to force the deal, claiming they'd shared information with him about spam and fake accounts. The lawsuit said Musk apparently believed that unlike other parties subject to Delaware contract law, he was free to change his mind, ruin the company, disrupt its operations, destroy shareholder value, and walk away. Musk filed a countersuit, and then a former Twitter employee filed a whistleblower complaint against the company, alleging that Twitter wasn't counting spam accounts correctly. For a while it looked like Elon would win, but then he changed his mind again. But in October 2022, he proposed to close the acquisition on the original terms. And late in the evening of October the 27th, Elon Musk finally bought out Twitter for $44 billion. He officially took the helm, and the show went on. As for Jack Dorsey, he stayed on Twitter's board until May 2022 and then resigned from Twitter entirely just a month after negotiations with Elon Musk began. Elon wasted no time in giving the company a major overhaul. Within days, he had fired the board, appointed himself CEO, laid off half of the 7,500 Twitter employees as Twitter is losing more than $4 million a day, and issued a series of chaotic product announcements. He has talked about rebooting Vine, loosening the platform's speech restrictions, and getting all verified accounts to pay $8 per month for their blue check. More than a dozen advocacy groups have written an open letter to Twitter's 20th largest advertisers, asking them to put their contracts on hold or pause until Musk clarifies what changes he plans to make. You see, his first innovations weren't well received, to say the least. Celebrities and advertisers were the first to leave Twitter after users started testing the limits of Elon's content moderation, and a lot of hate speech and racism flooded the platform. And then, fake accounts and misinformation also flooded the site in response to Musk's actions to delete fake accounts. Nothing is certain with Elon, except perhaps the fact that he has a long and successful history of running mission-driven companies. So who knows? The good news? If you move to Mars, you can still use your Twitter. We really do live in interesting times, and only time will tell what will be left of Twitter after Elon's brutal makeover. It seems that Twitter has always evolved through interaction with its users, and that the users actually made Twitter, while the co-founders fought each other and spent more time on ego issues than on understanding Twitter as a social phenomenon of the digital age and building monetization opportunities. Instead, Twitter has become sadly unprofitable, and Elon Musk will definitely need the best ideas, the best people, and the best strategies to bring Twitter to its true market value. Now, if you thought this story was full of betrayals and greed, wait until you hear the story of Uber. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. Just click the thumbnail here, and I'll see you there in a second. Cheers.